it all began. In August 1492, the Italian navigator Christopher Columbus, 1451–1506, guided by the Queen of Spain, led a fleet to China and India, embarking on a journey across the Atlantic Ocean. In October of the same year, Columbus arrived in the Bahamas in the Caribbean Sea and quickly landed on what is now the North American continent. There was no America on the world map at that time, so Columbus thought he had reached the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, when he saw the indigenous people living in North America, he named this region Indio. Since then, the Native Americans in North America have had the collective name of Indians. In the early 17th century, a religious reform movement emerged in England. To avoid religious persecution, the Puritans formed a group of 102 people and traveled to North America. At that time, North America was still barren, and these people didn't know how to make a living. At this point, the Plains Indians helped them by not only bringing them food and fruit, but also teaching them how to hunt and farm. As a result, these Puritans were able to survive in North America. On a harvest day, these Puritans invited 90 Indians to gather for a grand feast. And this day was called Thanksgiving Day by them, to express gratitude for the Indians' help. But these Indians never expected that the Westerners they had once helped would actually become the executioners of their entire people. The era of annihilation. Beginning in the 17th century, the Western slave trade flourished, and a large number of ships began to arrive on the North American continent. Countless white and black people flooded into North America, severely encroaching on the living space of the Indians. To acquire land, they also began to expel and even kill Indians. In addition to direct massacres on the North American continent, these white people pursued two policies. One was the buffalo policy, and the other was the scalping policy. The so-called buffalo policy refers to the fact that North America was teeming with buffalo, the main food source for the Indians. These colonists began to hunt buffalo with the aim of eliminating the Native Americans, on one hand depriving them of this vital food source and causing a large number of Indians to starve to death. According to statistics, in just 20 years, more than 13 million buffalo on the North American continent were wiped out, reduced to fewer than 1,000. The scalping policy was far more barbaric, as colonists exchanged money for Indian scalps. In 1703, it was stipulated that each scalp could be exchanged for $55, and by 1720, it increased to $76. Consequently, by the early 20th century, there were essentially no native Indians left on the entire American continent. Ishi. However, in 1911, someone discovered the last native Indian. He initially lived in the forest but had to flee to the city due to a forest fire, and was subsequently discovered. Soon after, a professor at the University of California found him and named him Ishi, also known as the last Indian. The professor then brought him to the museum and placed him in a glass room with the justification of studying Native American culture. From then on, Ishi became a being existing like an animal. Every Friday, Ishi was required to perform traditional Indian hunting techniques and other skills for visitors at the museum. In return, he received 3 free meals a day in the glass room and a life free from the elements. Although he had plenty of food and drink, he completely lost his dignity and freedom. And just 3 years later, in 1914, Ishi died after contracting tuberculosis. It seemed that death could end everything, but no. Ishi's fate was still not at peace. Scientists removed Ishi's brain and used it specifically for experiments, stating they wanted to study the differences between Indians and normal people. Finally, Ishi was treated like a normal human being in 2000. After the Native American Preservation Society spoke out, Ishi's brain was buried in his homeland, returning to nature and resting in the embrace of Mother Earth. Before Ishi, there was evidence that wild Indians still survived in 1911 in the unsettled and mountainous area of Tehama County. Who these people were, and what they were doing, was not an important matter to most whites, but it was of interest to a few anthropologists. In the following accounts, recorded from 1850 to 1911, we are informed that Indians continued to occupy the Yahi area and live off the bounty of the land. Little or no effort was made to do anything for the remnants of these people, who were shunted aside in the gold rush and the following period of farming settlement and town building. The Yahi area held little which whites really wanted, and as a result the few survivors managed to stay alive, though in decreasing numbers, well into the 20th century. While none of the documents for this period mention or identify the person Ishi, he was among them from about 1866 on, as a baby, a child, and a grown man. So, we read these generalized accounts of the Mill Creeks as records of the little Yahi nation of which Ishi was a member. The accounts which immediately follow are variable in their credibility. We are not so much concerned here with attitudes of white residents about local Indians who were considered dangerous, or murderers, or thieves as much as we are about the cumulative effect these attitudes had on the difficulties of Indians attempting to survive in the native state. If Ishi had been shot and killed when he was 15 years old, there would be nothing known of him. His chance survival, and his rescue by anthropologists who welcomed and consulted him as a person from another and earlier world of California, is well known from the story told in Ishi in Two Worlds. Here was a real, alive, person of native Californian ancestry from whom could be learned the true details of thought, culture, and language which were untouched by the influence of white culture which had dominated and influenced the native pattern since 1850. With Ishi, here was a true forest person, a man who lived by his bow and salmon spear, and who existed quite outside white civilization. J. Goldsboro Bruff crossed the plains in 1849, leading a company of gold seekers. He was unwell, and not being able to carry his journals, notes, instruments, and collection of minerals, he decided to stay over the winter at his camp in the expectation that help would be sent from Lassen's Rancho, 32 miles away. He spent the winter and early spring months of 1849 to 50 near Black Rock on Mill Creek, within calling distance of one of the principal Yahi villages. Daily he saw the smoke of their fires as they of his. Despite this, he never really saw the Yabi, except for their fresh footprints and other traces. They never in any way troubled him, and the mutual discretion with which they must have kept each other in view, or just out of view, tells a good deal both about the Yahi and Bruff. He drew from the same food sources the Yabi used. He even made his many crossings and recrossings of Mill Creek using their fallen log bridge. Bruff is a fine reporter and artist. His is, as far as we know, the only circumstantial and straightforward journal of weather, daily activities, and the people and their behavior on the Lassen Trail of the Tune. In April, 1 by 50. Barely alive front lack of food, rough. Managed to get to Lassen's, and on this last walk to Helpy makes a few observations about the Indians which are of interest to us because this is the first recorded mention of the Yahi. 1. Earliest notices of the Yao, 1850. April 8, 11850, thank God. 'Tis day, commences, sunrise, clear, wind light and variable, temp. 50 degrees. Just before daybreak one heard steps on the road behind me. Going up the hill, my pup barked furiously, but it was all black darkness, aside from the fire, and imagining it to be only a skulking wolf, going up, on the road, I paid no attention to it. One had a good brush fire, and IKNCSV the varmints would not approach it too close. Last night I fixed my coffee pot under a rock, to catch water, and it was full. Put in about a gill of coffee and boiled it. Drank the fluid, and catch the solid, for breakfast. Hung my quilt to dry. The sun must have been 2 hours high before I proceeded. On striking the road, I was astonished to see, on it, the fresh tracks of an Indian. He was pigeon-tocked, and one judged small, ha. He it Svaz, that passed before day, Svask steps I heard, and who set my dog barking. Oh! If I can only overtake him! Then will one have one hearty meal. A good broil. I examined my caps, they SVCRC good. I felt relieved, it gave me additional strength, to think one might soon get a broil off an Indian's leg. I could not but laugh, Sven. One thought of it, the expressions I have heard, how people would starve to death rather than cat human flesh. Fools! How little could they form an idea of the cravings of hunger. Let them be placed in my circumstances, and see how soon they would discard such silly ideas. My mouth fairly svacooked, for a piece of an Indian to broil. And one continued to look out sharper for one, than for any other game. The road was slip pen, with mud, and full of small round stones. From J. Goldsboro Brough, Gold Rush, ed. By Georgia Willis Reed and Ruth Gaines, New York, Columbia University Press, 1949, pages 339, 342. Having attained the summit and followed it some distance, slightly descending, but going over several slight rises in it, after which a regular descent. As I came along, was compelled to halt, and rest, at everything on which one could also support my knapsack. Feet quite sore, shoulders very sore, and would fail altogether, but for the hope of shooting an Indian, to cat. April 9, 1850, in a quarter-mile more, I met a low square-built Indian, then, dark, and had slight mustache. He had just emerged from a deep gulch, on the left. He was nude, except a kind of fig leaf, had a knife, a quiver full of arrows on his back, and a bow in his hand. He was accompanied by a small black Indian dog. One spoke to him in Spanish, but he did not understand me. I then made signs that I was hungry, starving, and wanted something to cat, which he comprehended but gave me to understand he had nothing, and was on his way to Diarta Creek, to shoot birds. My pup was following his dog, and I worried myself much to get her along, so glad was she to meet one of her own species. I had to make signs to the Indian to drive her back, beat her with his bow, which he did. While he was going off, one turned round, thought of eating him. He was then about 30 or 40 paces, but one could not shoot the poor wretch in the back. Besides, he had done me a favor. So I proceeded. Could this have been a mountain Indian? The one I trailed, and anted to cat? I dare say. One managed to get probably 2 miles farther, when one found the shriveled carcass of an ox. On this I rested, looking to see if the Indian visited my cache, but he kept lower down, crossing the road some distance this side of it. While I rested here, poor, little Nevada was gnawing and pulling about the hard withered remains one sat upon. Arose, and continued on the muddy, rough, winding road, till I at length reached and crossed two small branches, and a deep dry bed of another, and soon after CNTCRLCD, the oak timber, of Deer Creek bottom. I knew now that I was 3 miles probably from Davis's rancho, and that it was situated down the creek, below where the ford is. One nerved myself to persevere, by constantly exclaiming, I will soon have plenty to cat, bread, and meat, coffee, and milk. A house to sleep in. And an end of my sufferings. Yes, 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 saw a party of squaws, with large conical baskets on their backs, 2 men with them. I hailed them, the men came up, a dark wrinkled, and thin, old fellow, and a hardy-looking young man. I found they understood some Spanish, and asked for food. They pointed in 2 directions, telling me that Davis's was in that, and Lassen's in the other dot, hid from view by a forest of oaks, and sea. They gave me to understand that they belonged to Lassen, had nothing to eat, and the squaws were going to dig roots. So I left them, and went on. Soon after reached the banks of Deer Creek, at the ford, now a raging flood, a perfect cataract, and deep. The Indians were armed with quivers of arrows and bows, and long knives. From the same month, April, 1850, there is a newspaper notice of Indian white difficulties on Deer Creek. We have been informed by a gentleman from Deer Creek, that one day last week, some 12 men, who had been soldiers in the Mexican War, attacked a party of Indians whom they accused of stealing animals, and killed 4 or 5 men and 1 squaw. The Indians, after running some time before their pursuers, turned round, seeing so few in chase, and the pursuer became the pursued, until they gained a stronghold in a rocky part of the mountain, where the Indians attacked them furiously, wounding, it is believed fatally, 2 of the whites, one in the shoulder and the other in the arm. The siege lasted 2 days, during which the Indians lost 17 men and 1 squaw, besides those before mentioned. A man called Bill Eben is the leader of the assailants. A party of 200 was organizing at Deer Creek, and were expecting to start in pursuit last Thursday morning. The army does not seem to have done very much about chastising the Yahi. Rock Creek, mentioned in the first 2 letters, actually lies. Sacramento Daily Transcript, April 5, 1850. Just south of Yahi country. Chico, mentioned in the correspondence, is also south of the Yahi area. These letters are typical of military reports of the times. 2. Army Correspondence on the Yana and Yahi, 1862–1865. State of California, Executive Department, Sacramento, June 2, 7, 1862. Brig General George Wright, U.S. Army, Commanding Department of the Pacific, San Francisco, California. General, enclosed I send you a copy of a communication addressed to me by a committee appointed at a meeting of the citizens of Chico and vicinity, in Butte County, held on the 26th instant, in which representations are made of recent Indian outrages committed on Rock Creek, Butte Creek, and vicinity, and calling upon me for men and means, ammunition and arms, to assist them in quelling said outrages. Since receiving the communication, I have learned through private sources entitled to credit that the bodies of the children referred to have been found brutally murdered. I would respectfully request that you forward to the scene of Indian depredations in Butte County 1 company of infantry to assist the citizens in effectually putting an end to Indian outrages. And I would also ask of you, if it is possible, to deliver to the state of California, under whatever arrangement you may think proper, 500 stand of arms, that I may enable the citizens of the different counties to protect themselves against these repeated Indian outrages, and at the same time relieve yourself from the frequent demands I am compelled to make upon you for assistance. as the state has not one stand at her command. This communication will be handed you by Drive S.M. Sproul, a highly respectable citizen of Butte County, who will more fully explain affairs as they now exist in said county, and to whose statement I would earnestly call your attention. I have the honor to be, very respectfully, your obedient servant. 3. Newspaper accounts of fighting with the Yahi, 1862, July 1st. The cruel murders perpetrated at Rock Creek last week has created a general feeling of indignation. Red Bluff, California, Semi-Weekly Independent, July 1st, July 4th, August 8th, and August 19, 1862. Tie-in among our citizens, and the general expression is, that the prowling savages must be effectually wiped out. We have received a letter from J. W. Lemons, of Deer Creek, giving the particulars of the sad affair, a portion of which has been heretofore published. From this letter we learn that the Indians, after killing and scalping Thomas Allen, and wounding the Indian boy, attacked a party of young people, out blackberrying in Rock Creek Canyon, and captured Miss Ida Heacock, aged 17 years, her sister, aged 13, and a brother aged 10. A party who went in pursuit of the Indians found the bodies of the two girls, pierced with arrows and scalped, and stripped of their clothing. The boy has not yet been found. Men all along the valley are turning out in pursuit of the murderous savages. Drive S.M. Sproul, of Chico, has gone below for arms and ammunition, and assistance. There should be a general turnout from all sections, and every Indian exterminated that can be found in the mountains east of us. No person is safe along this valley as long as the savages are permitted to prowl around unmolested. It was only last spring that Mr. Meadow was chased by Indians near Antelope, and the only way to deal with the rascals is to shoot them down upon sight. July 4th. News came from the east side of the river, on Tuesday afternoon, that 150 Indians, painted and with heads shaved, were in the vicinity of Dye's Mill, prepared for war. The news was accompanied with the Macedonian cry, "Come over and help us." Several citizens, this hombre among the rest, armed and equipped as the law directs, and bent upon obtaining numerous Indian scalps, responded to the call, went over to Antelope, scoured the country, but didn't get sight of an Indian, nor obtain a scalp. The alarm grew out of the breaking up of an Indian camp some 4 miles from the mill, by L.V. Loomis and 9 others, scattering the Indians, burning their camp, with all their accoutrements, and finding the clothing of the 2 girls that were so barbarously murdered on Rock Creek, also the boys' shoes. The Red Devils left in a hurry, though nearly 150 strong, on the approach of the White Party, taking to the hills. August 8th. Captain Harmon Good, with his company of volunteer scouts, numbering 15 men, who have been out on the trail for some 2 weeks, hunting Indians, on Sunday last came upon a big Indian packing beef to the Indian camp. One of the men drew a bead on the redskin and shot him through. This was on Big Antelope, some 15 or 20 miles cast of Red Bluff. There were supposed to be WME 200 Indians in the camp, who made off, the band dividing into TWO companies. The scouts under Captain Good made off in an opposite direction, for the purpose of deceiving the Indians, which ruse succeeded. Near night the party retraced their steps, found the trail of the Indians and followed it up. After reaching the vicinity, where they supposed the Indians would camp, a halt was made, and Captain Good made a reconnoissance alone, creeping on his hands and knees, and before he was aware of it, found himself almost in the midst of the Indians, the crying of a papoose giving him the alarm. Retraced his steps as he had come, and ordered his men to surround the camp and wait for daylight before commencing the attack. At break of day several bucks started out to hunt for game, and coming suddenly upon Captain Good's men, were shot. This opened the battle, and a continuous fire was poured into the Indian camp, resulting in the killing of 17, which were found dead on the fields. 6 were known to be wounded, and the rest made their escape. A number of children were captured, and in the camp was found guns, ammunition, provisions, and clothing. 1 long Kentucky rifle was found, also guns bearing the mark of the Overland Mail Company. Captain Good and company have returned for supplies, having procured which, they will again start on the trail.